Okay, here's where I am with this. I just went to Walmart and bought some marine boat and equipment grease. Wasn't too expensive, wasn't the highest, but it looked like it was waterproof, so I bought 2 tubes, but as I'm putting one tube in, remember the axle and that spacer is in between the two bearings here. It started coming out a little bit as I'm pumping it up, so I'm thinking it took less than a tube to fill the whole cavity up all the way around everything. But if you're gonna do this, I suggest taking some grease by the tub and maybe just pack it in there before you press, the whole end on it, because, I could have pumped this thing, over 200 times, because it just puts out that little stream through that little hole. So it might have been easier just to pack it in there and put some between the axle and that spacer, slide the spacer on, then put some more grease around it, fill it up to, maybe to about there, and then press the rest of it on. It'll save your seals, because a little bit squeezed out past there, but the seal does leak a little bit on the end, that grease seal, so it'll keep it in once it starts rotating. But you don't want too much pressure in the middle here to blow out your seals, but it'll be okay. But that's where it is. It took about almost a full tube, and getting ready to put it back on. But while I was in here, I greased up that Zerk, and there's also a Zerk on the bottom of that shock mount down there. I don't see one on the swing arm bearings, but I know you can go to eBay and buy new bearings that go inside on the swing arm. So that might be next once we start getting this thing rolling, and we'll see how easy that swings up and down. I found another one at the bottom of the shock mount over there. I don't know if you can see that. Okay, so let's see if we can find any more. I don't see any more on the rear end, so got all new bearings for the front 2 tires. It was, I think, $11 on eBay, so we're gonna put this rear axle on, put the wheels back on. Gonna grease all these rusty bolts just so that they're nice and lubed up on the rear, and put a little grease on that too, just to make sure it keeps the water out. Okay, update. Master cylinder was seized. I don't know if you can see that, but just kept prying the piston down like that by pushing the spring down and then pushing this back up, pushing that down, pushing it back up. Kept spraying PB Blaster in both holes and working it up and down. And now when I push the push rod in, it springs back down. So I got that free. Now I'm going to reinstall it and put fresh fluid back in it and see if we can bleed those brakes. These are the pads. Had to take off, since the piston wasn't retracted, I had to pull off the 2 bolts that hold on the 2 brake pads there. As soon as you take that off and pull the caliper off, the brake shoes came out. So I just kind of rubbed them with sandpaper on a flat surface like the ground to get any grease off of them, and I'm going to put the master cylinder back on. Okay, I've got the axle back on, nice and free. Adjusted the parking brake, just cranked it in a little bit until it started to bind. Put the handle on, cranked it down, adjusted the parking brake cable so parking brake works. Let's see. Gotta push that down. Just locks that. And then you pull this parking brake lever like that. And then now, there was a little black thing on top of that, but I accidentally hit it and it popped off. So there's this little cap that goes over that, but now the parking brake is locked. The master cylinder I had freed up. It has a bad seal in it, the little, like the cup washer on the piston. Because no matter what I do, I can't bleed the brakes. The rear caliper is on. I made sure the piston was still good. I've got the parking brake adjusted where it should be, but the master cylinder is not building any pressure, so I've got one of those ordered. I think it was $10. The chain is still off. I've got that soaking in a oil bath after I washed it with gas. Here's the new clutch. Got it in oil, clutches and steels. It's been in there for over 24 hours so far. So that's ready to go. All right, so here's what I got on eBay. The clutch bolts. When I bought the Warrior, all the clutch was torn apart in a bucket. It was missing one of these bolts. So I think eBay, I got a set of bolts, full set, 5 bolts, and I think it was $12. I just found the bolts by themselves. I know I could have gotten a whole clutch kit, but the clutch kit I bought was this whole clutch kit: an air cleaner, oil filter, fuel filter, side cover gasket, and clutch, which I showed out there in the oil, for $39. So all this came new. I had to get another clutch basket because when I looked at this one, the person that took this apart, I found one of these in a bucket. So they broke the clutch basket. So I bought one on eBay, used. I think it was $20. But I noticed it has some fine ridges where the clutch plates wore. So I'm gonna file those down a little bit to make them smooth, because that can make the clutch hang up a little bit if they're trapped in the little grooves, instead of being able to slide and spread apart as they should. So just gonna take a flat file and file all those. This side seems not as rough as the other side, which must be the drive side or the coast side, I'm not sure. But I'm sure you guys know, if you're watching this video, there's a coast and a drive side on these, depending on which way it's going and which way the back tires are forcing it to turn. But right now, I'm just gonna file all these down. The old one didn't look so bad as far as ridges go, but it's broken. So just got the whole thing. Gonna put all the parts in there. The discs are in oil. You know, they're kind of burned up. Look at that, all the material is off of them. So it needed a new clutch, and all the steels have changed color. Whenever they start turning blue, that means there's heat that got into them. Especially when you see a clutch like that where all the material is off. Because this one's not bad, but sometimes it gets hard where it stops grabbing. Just like brakes. I've had a lot of drum brakes. They get so hot that they actually harden and they start squealing and stop giving you good friction anymore, because the material got so hard, it's baked in there. The material's baked. So Gonna put the clutch back together and put it on the bike. I've got a flat file, but it seems to fill up with aluminum bits very quickly. But the best one that seems to work is my round file. So if you can see all the teeth in that, you just have to do it 12 times. This side doesn't seem too rough, it's just this side here. So you can see how quickly this cuts down, if you can see the reflection. So let's do this one real fast. Chamfer the edge a little bit this way. And then, let's see how deep those grooves are. I just keep going till they all look the same. That means I'm hitting the bottoms of those teeth where they're worn. Chamfering the inside edge a little bit, like this. Chamfer the outside edge again. And as you can see, they're all smooth all the way across now. No deep pits for the clutches to get stuck in. But that's it. You just have to go around and do it 12 times. And then you'll go all the way around, and I might hit the opposite side a little bit too, but those don't look bad. They're not as deep. There's still little depressions in there, but they're not as deep. Remember, you've got a drive side and a coast side where those clutches are pushing against one way or the other, especially when you're using the engine to decelerate. So let's just get all these done, but I just wanted to video one of them so you can see what I'm doing to smooth those out. Here's my old one. And this basket hardly has any grooves in them at all. They're almost smooth. It's just too bad that they broke this tooth. I don't know if they grabbed onto this trying to hold it with when they were getting the nut loose, but they do make a special tool. You know, if you have to, you can just get a steel plate and put a couple studs in them or bolts that go through to hold this and have a little notch so you can get your socket on that nut. But there's no reason to grab any of these fingers with anything. You know, you could even put it in gear and hold the brake, and that'll keep this from rotating to break that nut loose. But obviously somebody held on to that one and broke it off. So it's a waste of $20 to have to buy one that's even worse than the one I had. But you do what you have to do. Some of these clutch kits you see on eBay, they sell a whole brand new basket with all new parts. You know, all new, I guess that's a pressure plate. They sell all new parts, but I'm doing this as cheaply as possible, to try to get this thing rebuilt and running. So let's add this video up there so you can see what I'm doing. All right, here's the basket all cleaned up, all filed on both sides. So now I'm just gonna have to put the clutch together after I clean this piece. And if you notice, there are two marks. There's a mark here, and I'll mark that with Sharpie so you can see it. A little arrow right there. And there's also an arrow on this side over here. Okay, so here's an arrow. Here's an arrow. And right now, there's 5 different ways you can put this on. So if you don't have this arrow and that arrow lined up, then these teeth will not go into the other half of the pressure plate. Because you can see, let's say I'm off, see it's hitting teeth, and you'll never get your clutch to grab because it's not tight enough. So if you just make sure you line up that arrow with that arrow, then you will get the teeth to align with the holes where it'll squeeze enough to get all your clutch packs, the steels and clutches, to squeeze together once the springs are all back in. All right, so just make sure you have that lined up with that, or else, you know, you can have 2, 3, 4, 5 different spots to put that in, but there's only one correct spot where the teeth will engage. So that arrow and that arrow. Okay, here's my clutch. There's a lot of videos on YouTube on how to put a clutch together, so I'm not going to bore you with this one, but basically you stack your clutch discs between the steels, between the discs on the 11th and the 3rd, 1, 2, 3rd disc. You put in that round ring, and then again on the 5th, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Put in that little spring flat round ring, and then you put the rest of them together. You line this up with those 2 arrows I was telling you about. And then now we put it back into the side of the motor, the engine. Okay, this is where we are with this. Took off the side cover, and remember, the person had the clutch out, so the side cover was loose and it was full of dirt, so got to get all this cleaned up. Maybe I'll spray it out. And then here's my clutch. Pull this basket off. This is the new basket I bought off of eBay, $20. So let's line that up. Remember, so this gear is going to line up with this gear, and then now you also have to line it up with these splines to get this clutch to slip in there. So let's see if it's lined up. If not, I need both hands, because I've got to turn the countershaft sprocket to make that turn, unless it's already lined up. Let's see if we can get this thing to go on there. So we might have to spin it a little bit. There we go. Remember that the gear inside has to line up. So let me see if I can get this to line up. There we go. That's it, because it just has to go on a little bit more. So what I do is I just reach in and turn the counter shaft, because I can't turn that spline shaft in there once the clutch is in the way, unless I pull it off, turn it a little bit, and then try again. It's easier if you have somebody holding this while you turn the counter shaft. So let me see if I can turn the counter shaft. Put the phone down. All right. Just hit to push that thing on there. and it went on. All right, putting this thing back together. I had to get a new lock plate from the Yamaha dealer here in town because I ended up looking at this one and it was too damaged to reuse. The little locating tab was broken off, the bend up plate. Looks like somebody's been in here before, so I bought the new lock plate. Well worth getting in here and putting that in new and not trying to bypass this step. These bolts I just threw in here because I don't have a pressure plate holding tool to tighten that nut to the 55 to 58 foot-pounds. So what I do is I put a wrench on one of these and a socket against the other side, and I cram it against one of these bolts with this crescent wrench, and that keeps it from turning, so I can tighten that nut without that special holding tool. But yeah, these are I just ran a tap in here to get these bolts in a little bit, just to keep them in place while I crank down the that nut. But I'll show that process happening in a minute. Okay, here's a picture of this setup I have where it's just holding this crescent wrench against the foot peg bolt. There's a socket in here between this bolt and the crescent wrench handle, so I can fit the socket in there off the torque wrench. I've got it set to 58 pounds, which I looked up on the internet, and just showing it clicking. So that's it. Now we just take that off. You bend your locking tabs down on your locking plate, and then I'll put the basket springs back in for the pressure plate, the bearing, and the nut or the little push rod, and then we're done. So let's get this side case on. And I did flush this out with a lot of brake cleaner, PB Blaster, some WD-40 type penetrant. This thing was filthy. There were little pieces of stuff everywhere. I don't know how long this case was open or out there in the elements, but there was all kinds of little pieces of grit, stuff in the bearings. I saw some weird material, gummed up stuff down there by the drain plug. I pulled off the filter and the drain plug from underneath after I removed the skid plate, and it was just coated with black stuff. So I don't know what was in this engine or going through it before I got this Warrior, but the engine's filthy. I can just imagine what the inside the case looks like, but I might try to flush that out with an extra gallon of oil and then drain it all out just to swish it around in there, and then change the oil again after I get it running for a few minutes. Okay, clutch is fully assembled. Push rod and bearing are back in, and this is all wiped down, so I can I'm gonna put a thin layer of silicone on both sides of my gasket, very thin, just to keep this thing from leaking. And time to put the side cover back on. All right, before I put the side cover on, I ran a tap into almost every one of these holes where I wasn't getting enough depth, because there are mud daubers that fill these 3 holes with mud. So I had to dig them out with a screwdriver and run a tap through. Here's my metric tap, and I just ran the tap through all the holes, cleaned them out, and then I would use my little quick twister here just so I could feel the threads clean after I ran the tap through and oiled them. Just wanted to make sure I get enough depth to get that little bolt tight before it bottomed out on the side cover. So all the threads are cleaned out. Did have to go to the Yamaha store and buy 3 of these bolts, 2 of the short ones and 1 of the long ones, because this side cover has 2 long bolts and the rest of them are the short ones. They were, I think, 95 cents a piece. The off-brand, not Yamaha ones. And also from eBay, I got my new master cylinder, and has a reservoir. It's a little bit smaller than the original reservoir, but that was less than $10. Master cylinder and reservoir, less than $10, because this one doesn't let me bleed the rear brake. So that's gonna go on. The side cover is gonna go on now. I wiped the surface off with lacquer thinner on the cover and this outside. I'll have to do it again before I put the thin layer of silicone on and the new gasket. But that's where I am. Right, side cover's on. The new clutch cable just showed up in my mail, so I'm gonna put that on. I've got the new master cylinder on. What I did to modify it, the hose that they sent with it, which is this guy. This was the hose that came with the new master cylinder. It was too short. There's the new reservoir. Couldn't use it because the hose was too short. So without having to go buy a new hose, I used the old hose, and I had to use this fitting and the new O-ring to put on the new master cylinder, but it's all bled. I've got brakes. I just have to go buy a spring. I'll get a spring from the hardware store and make it work. I had to shorten this rod a little bit, that much, because where I wanted this brake pedal, it was a little bit too long for me to adjust this up higher, where my foot with my boot or shoe on the brake, on the foot peg, I didn't like the brake as high as it was, you know, because when you're riding, your foot might be resting on that pedal a little bit, so you don't want to be applying the brake even just a little bit. So I wanted to adjust this a little bit lower, where the brake starts applying. So I had to shorten the rod that little bit just so I can twist this up a little higher to get the front of the pedal to go down. But brakes are bled, and I've got really good brakes. Like I said, the crankcase, I think the cases on the other side was filthy because of all the dirt I found in on the side cover being off, the clutch cover. So what I did was I took a spare 4 quarts of oil and filled this up just so the oil can get into the inside the main case. And I just put it in the highest gear and rolled it a little bit so I could hear it rotating inside. So now I'm just gonna drain the old oil out and go buy 3 quarts. I think they said it takes 2.6 quarts of oil. So I'm gonna go get some regular oil and drain out the other oil I just put in there and change the filter, the oil filter that came with my clutch rebuild kit, with air cleaner filter and oil filter and side cover gasket, clutches. So that's where I am now. It's getting back together. I got the seat. They told me that the carburetor probably needs to be cleaned because it wouldn't idle. So that's pretty easy. But now that I've got the side cover back on and sealed, and then now I can scrub all this, get it cleaned up, and then take the carburetor apart, clean out the pilot jet and the main jet, and everything should be ready to start up. And for some reason, I sprayed oil on all these air cleaner screws for the cover, and it smells. It smells like pee. So who knows what was living in there. Wherever this thing was parked, in a barn, outside next to a house, next to a garage. It just smells like pee, so I'm glad I have a new air cleaner. And I've got those soaking with penetrating oil. See if I can get those screws are all too tight for a regular Phillips to get out, so I might have to get my little impact tap on them a little bit. Or hell, if I have to, I'll just, I've got ways of getting out rusted screws. So we'll see what happens. Okay, have the oil changed. Cleaned out I flushed the engine out with some different oil. And look at this. I told you I smelled pee. I ripped the air cleaner top off. And it looks like something's been living in there. So that's why I smelled piss. So yep, all this whole box is gonna come out and get flushed, washed with soap and water. But boy, it really stinks. So here we go. The oil's filled up and getting to the point where I'm gonna try to crank it and see what happens now that oil's in it, and change that air cleaner and clean the carb. And this thing should be running. Got the master cylinder on, brakes are working. It's all good. Okay. Got the air box cleaned out, and I didn't want to clean or take the linkage off the carburetor. So all I do is pull it off, take off the bowl, and it looked fairly clean in there, surprisingly, because everything was so dirty on this thing. But I think the person I bought it from said she was gonna clean the carburetor out for on this thing. Okay, so this is what I use to clean out all the little jets, especially that pilot jet if it won't idle. Got this on eBay. These are called tip drills, like torch tip drills. Because before I used to use like a wire off of a wire brush to get in all the small little jet holes. But with this tip drill set, it's fairly cheap. I think it was less than $12. You have these tiny small ones here, like the smallest one. You know, you can just about get into any little jet. But you have to be careful because these on the end, you know, if you go in and out too much, you can enlarge the hole of the jet, especially that soft brass. So I just use it to poke if there's any old hard gas in there or gummy deposits. Use it to poke the hole through, and then I blow usually carb cleaner or even just WD-40 type, you know, penetrant, to make sure that I can see. I put the bowl back on so I could, but I wanted to show all these tip drills you can get for settling torch, cleaning out the little holes. But I blow solvent into the jet hole and see if it comes out somewhere. So that way I know the port's open. You know, you can even blow in through here with the needle and seat, either just air or I use WD-40. You blow in there and you work your float up and down, and you can see if your needle and seat's clean, or clean it out that way too without taking the whole bolt off. But I put this back together. I didn't want to clean it up too much yet, so I don't have to take off the throttle cable. I'm just gonna put it back on and put gas in it. I've got the gas tank drying out there. It was full of crap. The little top filter off the petcock came out when I was swishing it around with soap water. But all this is cleaned up. Here's the air box. It was full of mouse pee and mouse house stuffing. So this is it. The kit I bought with the clutch did come with a fuel filter. So I'm not gonna change the petcock fuel filter. I'm just gonna use that in line. and haven't figured out where this goes yet, because I see some Yamahas this goes in the back, but mine just had a little strainer down by the drain plug, so I'm not sure if my engine even uses that. But it came with a new plug, came with those 2 filters, and I'm gonna put this on, put gas in it, and probably see if this thing fires up. All right, here's my update and final installment for this one. Everything is running. I took apart the petcock and cleaned it, and it was all gummed up, but it's broken up on top for the reserve, and you can see it dripping. It's dripping gas, so since I took it off and cleaned it out, I ordered a new one. It's coming on eBay. I put the filter in. Carburetor's leaking a little bit, so I'm gonna pull that apart and see where that's coming from, make sure the needle and seat isn't stuck. But it runs well, it's just that it backfires through the carb every once in a while. I put a hose clamp on the rubber part because that was ripped. So I have a new manifold from eBay coming. Very cheap, I think it was $7. But that hose clamp I put on there, if you have this problem and can't wait, that tightens. That's a 2-piece manifold. They do sell an aluminum one on eBay. It's a 2-piece manifold with a rubber piece holding the 2 together. So when that rubber degrades, you get a leak. So on this one, I've got that hose clamp, clamping that together, which stiffens that whole unit up and keeps it from leaking. I have to adjust the valves because it's backfiring through the carburetor as it's idling. So I know the intake valve must be sticking open a little bit because the spark plug fires, and it's backfiring a little bit through the intake. So I have the same problem with this one. This little Breeze I bought, the rubber was split here, so I put a hose clamp on it, which stiffens it up, because the rubber, you can actually pull this 2-piece section apart. But this one also backfires while it's idling. Gotta adjust the valves on it, and that one should be good to go, but this one's done. So the new clutch is in. I was riding it yesterday. I've got new grips that just came because this grip was all nasty rubber. It was a gel, but it turned into, the rubber turned back into oil, so it's just nasty. Gets on your hands. Have 2 new grips that just arrived. I'm gonna put those on. Had to modify the master cylinder assembly because the one I got off eBay, the hose was too short for the little reservoir. Had to get a spring from the hardware store. I just cut it to shorten it to make it work to return the pedal. And everything else is good. Tried reverse, it works. I've got 2 tires on order because all these tires are plugged, and I ordered the 6-ply tires instead of the 4-ply cheapies. I think I could get all 4 for less than $200, but I went ahead and just ordered 2 because one of my fronts was leaking. So I ordered 2 front 6-ply tires, and just waiting on the petcock and adjust the valves, and this thing should be good to go. So this was my $800 Warrior, found on Marketplace, and it's gonna close this one out. Thanks guys, thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing.